Softball America. Hello, hi, welcome. It's March 20th. It's Wednesday morning on the East Coast in Central Time, out west on the Pacific Coast. We're excited that you're here. I'm Gray Robertson, and joining me today, it is not the wickedly talented Adele Dazeem. No, it is the utterly stupendous Sydney Supple. Sid, hello. How are you?
I am wonderful. Let me tell you, I have big shoes to fill, but I'm happy to be here alongside you talking about softball and all the madness that we are in. You know, they call it March Madness for basketball, but I think it really is for softball.
We're going to be talking softball, of course, but I will ask, did you fill out your basketball bracket, men's and women's so far?
Absolutely. I have both of them. I have multiple on each, but I have one that's like my main one.
All right, so who's your champion? I mean, all right, I'll go ahead and assume I went South Carolina for the women. Of course, you?
I did too. I did too. You know, in the women's, there's always less upsets as well. So you have to keep that in mind. But I want to see Caitlin Clark have a far run. Final four. If she makes it there, I'd be happy with it for her.
Yeah. Men's side, I went Purdue. I went Big Ten.
Wow. That is courageous with their performance the last 3 years. And I'm a Big Ten native. I tend to pull that way. I can't say I did for them. I went North Carolina this year.
Wow.
Mhm.
Okay. To match the shirt color, I see, sort of.
I think it all through. Let me tell you, everything is planned.
Okay, perfect. Well, hey, we're excited that everybody's here for Good Morning Softball America. We're going to talk about so much stuff. We've got the biggest headlines that we'll discuss, including a few shocking results the last few days. We'll discuss the parity, not only mid-majors and Power 5 conference teams, of course, but also within conferences. I feel like there are just a bunch of intriguing races. And then we'll do a little vibe check. And then we'll do the regional host draft. Little over a month in, who do we feel confident right now will be hosting a regional? Also, the chat is wide open. Wide open. Ask any question, make any comment. We'll flash it on the screen. I see the number. A lot of you are tuning in. Just, put something in the chat and we'll put it on screen as long as it's somewhat appropriate. All right, Sydney, there's so much to discuss. And by the way, make sure that you like and subscribe to the YouTube page and all that fun stuff. Some of the biggest headlines around the sport, it was interesting on Sunday night. We're having the discussion for the top 25. And it was near unanimous that on Monday morning, LSU was going to be number one.
Yep.
And then they lost to Ole Miss on Sunday. And then they got smoked by Ole Miss on Monday. And frankly, it was quite stunning. As somebody who tracks the SEC as closely as I do, I have not had a super high regard of Ole Miss to start the year. LSU had kind of played with fire at times, but found ways to win. To see what the Rebels did in Baton Rouge, which is, you'll ask any SEC player, an incredibly tough place to play, was frankly shocking.
I could not agree more. And I was one of those people who I was ready to crown LSU as the number one. And, Sunday's loss, that was tough. But I think the biggest thing was Monday is what really shocked everyone. And that's just because of the response. And listening to the press conference from, Beth Torina, LSU's head coach, she said, basically, our team realized on Saturday night that we weren't invincible, and they responded in a terrible way. They were very in their feelings, and they could not let Sunday go. And you saw that really impact the way they came out on Monday. And next thing you know, Ole Miss has a 4-0 lead, and they stuck it to them early. So I just think it was their response on Monday that one really will be something that I'll remember LSU by. They're still so talented. Don't get me wrong. Losses are going to happen, but how can you respond to it? And that was not their best response.
We've got a message in the chat from Clint. Don't let the Rebs get hot. Hey, look, I agree. I've had to reevaluate everything that I know about the SEC and about Ole Miss and about where their place is. I was very impressed with McKenna Thermos. We all have known, obviously, that Jayla Lassiter is really good and Jaden Pone coming from Longwood. But to see it all come together 1 through 9 in the lineup, to see the pitching staff be able to hold down an offense like LSU's, that to me was one of the biggest statements I've seen in the last week or so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Ole Miss is turning a lot of heads, and I don't think they're going to get overlooked now throughout the rest of SEC. But like you said, to do it at LSU's home, they pack around, gosh, 2,600 fans. It's one of the toughest environments to play in. And I just give Ole Miss a ton of credit. I think they are now finding their groove at the perfect time heading into SEC play. And that's why you play the game, right? It shouldn't, you have 7 innings for a reason. The game doesn't know who's supposed to win. So that's why you have to go out every single inning and show them.
Absolutely. And for Ole Miss to do what they did against pretty much all the main pitchers for LSU, just very, very impressive. I want to also make sure that we talk about what happened last night. And no, I'm not talking about the game that I called. I'm talking about the game that we were tracking while I was calling a game, which is Tulsa shutting out Oklahoma State behind a complete game victory from my FGCL girl, Mara Moore, who got a lot of people who played in other summer leagues out in that game. It was a very impressive pitching performance from Mara Moore for Oklahoma State, kind of the first baffling evening for them in a while, and teams will have that. There are games where you look and you're like, what's going on with this team that I think is really good? But it just kind of goes to show that truly in this sport this year, nobody is safe.
Yeah, Moore was unbelievable. I actually started tuning in probably the last few innings when I realized what was happening. And where she was so effective is she was just hammering that outside corner, lefty or righty. And you could tell it took away all of the power for Oklahoma State and when they could not just turn on the ball. And she was mixing in her off speed at such a perfect height where it was really tunneling the pitches. And I just thought that was phenomenal. I thought they came in, their pitching coach called a wonderful game, more executed, and it was their highest ranked win since 2009. So for the program, just such a big moment.
I wanted to ask you something strategically because, again, I track all the summer league young ladies who've played last year in Clarksville and Florida, and a lot of them are on Oklahoma State, and a lot of them are in and out of a lineup. We've seen Kenny Gajewski switch up who's playing. It feels like game in and game out. I would be surprised if there has been a starting lineup that's been the same from one game to the next. As a player, how do you respond to that, knowing that, I might be in tonight or tomorrow? It could be just a pinch hitting opportunity, or I mean, it seems like it's gone on long enough to where it could be making a little bit of a negative impact almost.
I think it's the most challenging on the mental side of the game because you just have to come at it from this perspective that you're playing every single game because you have to prepare that way mentally and physically. And then, you get told you don't. And that's one of the hardest things for, I think, a player, a competitor who reaches this level because they have put so much sacrifices into it, and to not be able to play. That's something people really have to work through in terms of how they respond to that. And I think you see the best players who still stay locked in when they're in the dugout, just in case they get, that pinch at bat moment. They're studying the pitcher. They're saying, if I'm, in the hole, what pitches am I going to attack? And that's where you see the best of the best. Now, I agree. I think the lineup has changed so much. I think it can sometimes create almost like an identity crisis. Like, who are we as an offensive lineup? What roles do people play? Because I think anyone knows once you get that consistent lineup, you kind of understand your role as a hitter. Are you at the top? Do I just need to get on base? Am I a 4-5? I'm looking to drive people in and drive them over. You don't have that when you're constantly switching it.
Yeah, it's been interesting to track. Again, really, I mean, it's the bottom half of the order for Oklahoma State, but at some point you do kind of need to have your people, and maybe one or two that will come in a pinch hitting situation. But the order can shift. But when you've got people flipping in and out all the time, it just seems like there are nights like last night that can happen where the combination is wrong, and you kind of run that risk when you have so many different combinations going on every single game.
And let's be honest, as a player, like kind of seeing the lineup, that's your stamp of approval by a coach, quite frankly. And when your coach puts you in that lineup, there's a certain confidence that you feel as a player that they put you in there. And I just would love to know kind of the confidence levels with a few players who specifically have been back and forth, which how much are they feeling that trust from their coaching staff so then they're able to feel that trust within themselves.
Absolutely. And by the way, just a reminder, everybody, the chat is open and we will be doing a Q&A later on in the show. So load up your questions now. We'll have them in the queue, ready to go. Sydney, let's talk about parity. It's everybody's favorite word, right? In
Yeah.
college softball. And what's so funny is you have this strange juxtaposition of, okay, well, the last 3 years, we've seen parity like never before. And we've also seen Oklahoma
Yeah.
win the national championship and do it in dominant fashion. So, Tom Canterbury and I have always said on the Out of the Box podcast, like if you took Oklahoma out, you would have three of the craziest softball seasons we've seen in a while. And this year, it seems like we're right back to that. You've got the mid-majors popping up and winning some games. You've got teams who are inconsistent, to say the least. Conference races that we'll get into in just a minute are as topsy-turvy as ever before. And that leads to more content for us on the media side. And also just kind of a landscape that's tough to predict as it stands right now, because there are maybe only 3 or 4 teams where I can say, well, all right, they're probably going to come top 2 in their conference. And other than that, it can kind of go any which way.
This is the most exciting time to be in the sport. And you're absolutely right. If you look at kind of our rankings for Softball America, besides 1, but 2 through 25, it has caused me serious headaches like every Sunday night.
It's
And
awful.
it is in trying to figure it out. And I laugh with Nicole Mendez, one of our other partners, because she's so ready to drop a team. And I'm like over here, like thinking about it so hardly. I'm like sweating. Because the parody is so real and it makes it so exciting. But I think you just look at that. We've been saying it already in this podcast. Every game is fair game, and you're seeing that with the way they're playing. And upsets are almost like contagious because once one happens, it allows any team to be like, oh, that team is in my conference. They just upset a top 10 team. Well, so can I. And you're starting to see names come into question that I have never seen in the top 25. Georgia Tech, Texas State, so many that haven't been in these conversations that are now in these conversations where it's not top 25 I'm looking at. It's like top 40 who I think can beat anyone in the country right now. Like we said, Oklahoma has been that outlier these last few years. They're even facing a lot closer games this season that feels different. So it's an exciting time. We're heading into conference play. I cover Big Ten. I think that's an open field. I think SEC is an open playing field in so many ways. So being in the sport, there's going to be a lot of madness happening.
Yeah, it's so funny because you talk about the ballots and how the rankings work, and this isn't going to be a top 25 discussion, but I'll have a team, somewhere in 20 to 25, and they'll lose a game they shouldn't, and I'll go, cool, out, goodbye.
Right.
And I'll bump a team up. I update these rankings like hourly as the weekend goes on. And then that team that I just moved in will lose and be like, oh my gosh, well, I guess this other team is back in. And it's been frankly quite difficult. And it also is not helped by the fact, as great as the games are, everybody in the non-conference is now playing each other.
Mm-hmm.
So, and often multiple times. So head to head kind of gets muddled because, well, all right, this team beat this team, but then lost to this other team that's behind them who lost to a team in front. It's all very confusing and super fun to do.
It is. And you have to kind of wonder what has been the change. And I think specifically this year is after COVID, we saw such, an outcry of these fifth years, these graduate players who stay all the way through. And I think this is the last year that you're able to do it, the last year of fifth years from the COVID year. And I think between this year and next season, you're going to see so many younger new faces than you've ever before. I think we're already seeing it this year. I look at like a team like UCLA. We've had to completely relearn their players, their identity. And it's really exciting. There's new opportunities and the game's changing with new faces.
All right, let's look at some of the conference races. We'll start in the ACC. Virginia Tech sits at 9-0. They will be in Tuscaloosa this weekend, if you are so inclined, viewing public. Kaylee Tao and I will be on the broadcast on Friday and Saturday for Alabama and Virginia Tech on SEC Network Plus. Hokies are at 9-0. Duke and Clemson at 5-1. Georgia Tech at 7-2. Yeah. You will note I did not mention Florida State, who has only 2 conference losses, but they haven't played nearly as many games as some of the other teams. And it seems like this might be the year where it's not the Noles and somebody else is able to step up. And in my eyes, it's kind of down to Duke and Virginia Tech.
I agree. I think Virginia Tech came into this season, they were ranked so much lower, I feel like, in losing a few key players, but they're on a 9-game winning streak right now, and they look amazing. They feel like they have a lot of their game figured out. They have this like confidence in talking to a few of the players about what their identity is, and I think that just plays such a key part. And they're coming into this conference, they were intimidated by Duke being, a top 5 teams. Now we're seeing them top 3. They're not intimidated by Florida State, who just played in the national championship series last season. And that just speaks volumes. I think ACC is having it one of its most competitive seasons. And I agree. I think Florida State, just because of last season, this is a whole new year, a whole new makeup of players, specifically from a pitching side with losing, Catherine Sandercock. You still have players like Michaela Edenfield, but we're seeing them go through growing pains that we didn't see last season too.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And Clemson kind of sits there with Cagle, and she did not participate last week. I saw a report about an illness, and we'll be keeping track on her status, especially tonight in a game against South Carolina. And then Georgia Tech. Let's talk. Look, the Jackets are swinging it, man. I mean, they've got some pop with Mallory Black and just a lineup that has really been potent. When I watched them week 1 in Atlanta when Alabama was there, the Tide pitching did a fairly good job keeping Georgia Tech in the yard. Mm-hmm. And there were still, though, a lot of hard outs, the loud outs that stick in your mind a little bit as a pitcher. And since then, we've seen those loud outs turn into hits and home runs. And even though they just lost a series to Notre Dame, it still seems like Georgia Tech is for sure an NCAA tournament team if they can keep racking up some of these ACC wins.
I completely agree. And I think you said it best. Their strength really feels like it's in their hitting in terms of just how they're able to compete against some of the best pitchers. Now, I think Notre Dame did a really great job mixing in a lot of changeups and just kind of spots in the location, surprising them with those inside pitches after pounding away that they hadn't really seen before. And that's what Notre Dame does best. I mean, they're a very tremendous schools, I feel like, and that's what they allow is their smartness when they come into their game plan. And you just saw that and how they prepared for them. But I still think Georgia Tech is not done making noise. When you have a lineup like they do, I think they're going to make a deep run, like you mentioned. And they've already turned a lot of heads. I think they're gaining a lot of respect. And so I think a target is starting to build on their back that they haven't had before.
All right, let's go to the Big 12. I'm surprised I haven't seen any Sooners in the chat, honestly. Yeah. Where are you?
Love them. We're waiting.
Come on, Oklahoma. Where are you? Show up in the chat. I need this. OU sitting at 6-0, Texas and Oklahoma State at 5-1. It seems like it'll be those 3 teams. It's not a big surprise. A lot will come down to the round robin between those 3. OU has to go to Texas. They host Oklahoma State. I think OU is probably still going to win the Big 12. However, because I trust them not to take a surprising loss, like, say, Texas did against Houston. But I do think that the gap has closed a little bit between the Sooners and the teams right behind.
It 100% has. But the thing that this Oklahoma team always relies on is their experience. I mean, you only can win so many games in a row like they did when you just have that tremendous amount of experience and playing at, the pinnacle in Oklahoma City and winning on there. So this team feels like at any point in the game, they can be down how many runs in the 7th. You just see this belief. I was there at the game. They got upset by, Louisiana for the very first time in 72 games. And until their very last out, everyone in the stadium collectively believed Oklahoma was going to win. And I feel like they ride on that belief because they have earned it. You look at the depth that their lineup holds. I think they still have one of the deepest lineups, in my opinion, 1 through 9. We've seen Jada Coleman in the 9 spot. We've seen Riley Boone, who I think is one of the most underrated and beneficial 9-hole players in the country, the way she turns around the lineup. But also they have a different pitching staff this year that has still been successful, but I'm curious to see, how it plays out. I think obviously Maxwell's amazing. And then you have Nicole May, who has been so steady for them. But they also brought in 3 transfers. And I'm just going to be really excited to see the deeper they get into conference and then especially in playoffs, how they can perform.
All you have to do is mention OU and the chat is
And the
popping.
chat's coming. I love it. I love
We
OU
did it.
fans. They were such a wonderful host, I have to say. Going their opening weekend of their stadium. First of all, they broke glass ceilings for the sport. It's absolutely inspiring. But those are the most diehard, devoted fans I have ever met in my entire life. And I have so much respect for them.
They have reset the standard of facilities. I think Love's Field at OU and I think Davis Diamond, which is still one of the most exquisite places I've ever watched a sporting event and or called a sporting event. Those 2 places have reset the possibility for stadiums, not just in the how good the facility is, but also in capacity size and what you can bring in. I also wanted to flash this comment because this is a great little mention of Kansas, who's one of the real stories in softball this year. This is a Kansas team that will play Houston this weekend and potentially has the chance to solidify top half in the Big 12 for now and to really kind of prove that they look like one of those teams, but also that has a real possibility of getting to the NCAA tournament this year. It's been very impressive what Kansas has done, especially this past weekend in that sweep of Baylor.
And I was high on Baylor after the Mary Nutter, being able to watch kind of their comeback wins and certain players step up. But the fact that Kansas held them to 6 runs in 3 games spoke volumes right after, beating Wichita State, who we've seen kind of flirt with that top 25. And before that, they beat UCF. So you're talking, teams they haven't swept and beat in a long time, and they're doing it with grace and by multiple runs. So I agree. I think that is a program that is on a very high trajectory right now.
All right, we've got a question in the chat about the Big 12. We will do a full Q&A later, folks, but this seemed relevant. Terry Littlejohn, what do you think of Baylor and how they're doing? Look, Kansas has been impressive, but on the flip side, Baylor getting swept by Kansas in the way that they did is pretty disappointing. Yeah. And with a lineup that is full of experience, with a pitching staff that is fairly deep. I know that they've been dealing still with some injury issues and all that not fun stuff, but Baylor's too talented to be where we have them in the top 25.
Here's what I'll say. They have all the right pieces to the puzzle, but they haven't figured out how to connect it on a consistent level yet. To only score 2 runs in a series, no matter who you're playing, is just frankly unacceptable. And you have a very talented pitching staff, but you have to produce offensively. And the reason why I say it's unacceptable, because I know the hitters they have in that lineup. Govan, she's hitting, high 400s right now. And they have 4 players right now hitting in the 300s. So they're getting the hits, but they're not able to string them together. And that's what I want to see more of an emphasis on. You're getting a runner on base. Let's just simplify the game, because it can feel really hard as a hitter. Let's focus on just bringing them a base further and not trying to get that big hit, because as a team right now, they only have 6 home runs on the season. So there's not a high power numbers. They have to find a way to produce, whether it's singles, walks, anything to score.
I also see CJ Bunker's question that will be broached later on in the show. Let's go to the Big Ten. I'm just going to sit back and let you cook, Sydney, because as you mentioned, this conference race feels so wide open. Everybody came into the year thinking it would be Nebraska and everybody else, but the Jordy Ball injury has kind of thrown the entire conference in flux. We can have a separate discussion if we want about what the NCAA tournament prospects look like for this conference. It's hard for me to see more than maybe 3 bids. But in terms of the conference race itself, I can make the argument for 5 or 6 teams that can win the league.
Yeah, you bring up a great point. I think we're going to get to the parity in a second. But first, it's important. We just wrapped up the Big Ten, former Big Ten player. They just wrapped up their games and they had 11 ranked wins between all their teams. Now that is it's frankly not enough for a conference to be able to make headways. in your RPI, be able to host. And that's something that the Big Ten struggles with every single year is they have to be so ready to go those first 5 weekends when they are facing their ranked opponents, because if they don't make the most out of it, it will hurt them down the stretch. We've seen it happen year after year with teams who are on the bubble to host. And so that, from that standpoint, that was a little hard to watch because I do think there is such talent and parity. Now, we talked about teams that have came up and surprised us. Penn State has been one of the most exciting teams I have been following this season. When you bring in a first-year player like Bridget Nemeth, who has just developed into such a strong ace. She's 10-0 on the season. She has brought this Penn State team to new heights and new beliefs than they've ever had before. We saw them get a ranked win against Arkansas earlier this season, and I cannot wait to watch them compete in the Big Ten, especially in weekend number 1. We're going to see them against Indiana, who leads the Big Ten right now in wins. They have 22, and they're also led by an ace, Brandon Copeland, who has about a 1.62 ERA. She's also hitting almost just under 400. So this Indiana team, they're a team that's been, I'm going to say, nibbling on greatness the past few years, using my little journalism vocabulary, where they have been right on the cusp of a championship. You're still laughing at my word choice. I love it.
Nibbling that.
Nibbling, like they're right there. They've taken bites and pieces, but they haven't taken the whole thing. And I am excited for the potential opportunity. I think they've brought back so many returners. They've over 90% of their starting lineup that made it to the Big Ten championship last year, where they fell short to Northwestern. I mean, sorry, not sorry. But they have an opportunity to go out and win it this year, and I think prove what they know they're capable of. And then I brought up Northwestern earlier. That has been one of the biggest question marks of college softball is how are the Wildcats back-to-back Big Ten champions going to be able to step up with losing majority of their starting lineup? And bringing in Ashley Miller has been a tremendous impact for them just from an ace perspective. She helped pick up their 2 wins, ranked wins last season, their very first 2 of the season. But I think you're starting to see a team who, again, has 4 all Big Ten players who returned from last season and a handful of players who do have that Oklahoma City mentality where they know what it takes to win in those big moments. And I think this team is really starting to mesh from everything that we're seeing and what I've been hearing internally. So I think you can't count them out. Sky's the limit in terms of what they can really grow into with starting so many first-year players. But then you also have Ohio State, who comes in with 16 wins. Rutgers is coming in with 18 wins. So it's just such an exciting time for the conference. I'd even mention Minnesota and Michigan. Both of them have 2 ranked wins, tied for the most. Michigan has an ace in Lauren Durkowski, who we have seen, handle Florida. We've seen Michigan rule Florida. So long story short, it's anyone's games. You have to tune in because it's going to be an exciting time for the conference.
Here's the problem, and I agree with everything you said.
Yes.
The Big Ten has the same number of teams inside the top 50 of the, as of 20 minutes ago, newly updated RPI as they do outside the top 100. Mm-hmm. So it's the metrics are not loving the conference this year, and that's why I mentioned a little bit ago that I could foresee 3 bids at most. And as fun as the conference race is going to be, with so many potential pitfalls, it's hard to see anybody being able to strengthen their resume within conference play, just based on the numbers. No shots at the Big Ten. Yeah. I'm just reading the math.
100%. Numbers are the numbers. And again, that comes down to not being able to make the most in your ranked opportunities in the preseason. We saw a lot of those games, unfortunately, get rained out, which is just tough for either side. Clearwater was a big loss for 5 Big Ten teams, that were there. But that is where the conference realignment will help a conference like the Big Ten. You're bringing in powerhouses like Oregon, UCLA, and to be able to just have, and Washington, to have those ranked opportunities in conference will really change the landscape in a positive way.
All right, well, you mentioned realignment, so let's go to the Pac-12. The Final Swing, hosted by Aaliyah Jordan, is a pod that will air later on this week. Check out all the podcast episodes on the YouTube page. Aaliyah Jordan's UCLA Bruins are 3-0 in conference play. So too is Stanford. Now, UCLA will take on Washington in Seattle this weekend. The Bruins have been playing a lot better lately. Are they truly better, though? Now's the time to find out, because if they go and win a series at Seattle against a Washington team that I think is pretty good,
Yes.
then a statement will have been made.
Agree. Washington is one of my top teams, I would say, this season, but UCLA has just impressed me in so many ways in their poise and response. How many people wrote them off the first 2 weekends besides themselves? And to be able to speak with their team in Clearwater and then call their games in Mary Nutter, where they really started to get those gritty wins, I think you saw younger players step up and say, they finally arrived. And that's what UCLA does so well. And people forget because they just remember, you know, Rachel Garcia, Megan Faramo, and they just remember where they were when they ended. But these players started their first year, and UCLA does a great job of that, is they're willing to go through those growing pains to be able to reach the benefit on the back end side. And I think the Bruins learned their lesson tough last year, where they faced adversity for the first time at the end. And I'm excited to see them facing in the beginning to then see where they can grow and finish.
All right, let's go to the SEC. I want to make sure that we still have time to get to everything that we want to here on this show. Tennessee is undefeated at 3-0. A&M is sitting at 5-1. How about them Aggies sweeping South Carolina and then last weekend taking 2 of 3 on the road against Mississippi State? LSU at 4-2. Florida and Georgia both at 2-1. Everybody still trying to get caught up. You've got an Alabama bye weekend this weekend, and by the end, obviously, everyone will have played the same amount of games. But what Tennessee did this past weekend, and Tom and I talked to Kiki Malloy on Monday, to sweep Missouri, who I think is fairly good, in such a dominant fashion, was like similar to Ole Miss, but in a different way, as big a statement as you can make in this conference. And now we'll see if they can parlay it going forward in a road series against good old Vaughter and South Carolina.
There is no bats that are hotter than I think Tennessee's right now. Personally, they hit around, I think it was 8 home runs this past weekend. You mentioned the dominant performances. They just seem like they're meshing on every side of the field. Kiki Malloy, just the leadership that she brings and coming back for her 5th year. She's one of the most dangerous hitters in the country, because not only can she hit bombs, but she's so athletic. She puts a ball in play. You have to be almost perfect to be able to get her out. And Gray, I would almost argue that this conference feels like the Big Ten in a way that I feel like it's very open for the taking, especially with LSU now being down 2 losses after last weekend.
So I'm trying to find it. The chat is popping. Hello, everybody. And if you're putting in a question, I might miss it because I went back to the beginning to pull up this question from CJ Bunker 888. And I think is that Michael Myers in the picture?
That's a great question.
Happy Halloween to us all. Here's a question, since they don't play in the regular season. Who wins a 3-game series right now between Georgia and LSU? My answer is Georgia. Like, man. And let me tell you something. We talked about this on the CTSM broadcast. In 2021, Georgia went to the Women's College World Series. Mm-hmm. And all of us were shocked because we weren't sure that was a team that at the time had the capability to get to OKC. There were a bunch of freshmen on the squad. Mary Wilson-Avant was leading the way pitching, but they weren't very deep in the circle. And they found a way. They caught fire, and they laid the foundation for this year. The kids have grown up, and all those freshmen that went to the World Series in 2021 are seniors now. They've had 4 years plus working with Tony Baldwin, who's one of the best hitting coaches in America. And we're seeing the dividends come through from that foundation that was laid in 2021. In the preseason, I said that there were 3 teams that could challenge Oklahoma for the national championship, and Georgia was one of them. And watching them this weekend, the way that even their outs are scary, that's the kind of stuff that Oklahoma does to you. Now, I don't think Georgia's there with OU yet, but I think that the offense is very, very threatening. And that, to me, says that Georgia's a national championship contender, and I think that would be a series that Georgia would win, perhaps with ease.
I agree, and I kinda love that you brought up Oklahoma because how exciting when they finally move conferences and we'll get matchups like Georgia, especially at a time like this when I think that they're at the highest I've seen their program, truthfully, in 4 or 5 years. I agree. I think they have that 2021 feel, but even greater. It caught people by surprise then, where they're not catching anyone by surprise. They're so well respected. And I had a chance to talk to Jaden Fields, a couple of times this season, and the chemistry runs so deep. And I'm the first believer when relationships are so strong, it shines through in your play. And you're seeing that this is a group of women who in the offseason committed to greatness, and they have just put in relentless amount of hours of work to reach the heights they're reaching now, and they still have a lot left to prove.
And I think the conference race as a whole, we'll get to some of the stuff this weekend. You've got, in my eyes, 3 of the top teams on the road this weekend, so things could get even more topsy-turvy. But that's enough with the conference discussion. Sydney, I'm going to play the video. It's time for a vibe check. 8 teams. These are teams that are kind of all over the map in the RPI, in and out of the rankings, perception changes weekly, and we're going to give a little vibe check on them. We'll start with the Missouri Tigers, a team that I think is good. Then they got smacked by Tennessee this past weekend, got swept in Knoxville. Could be more Tennessee than anything that Missouri's doing wrong. But Lauren Krings has seen her her ERA get close to 3, and the lineup behind Honnold and Laird are struggling. So vibe check on Missouri, Sydney Supple.
Ask me right now, bad. And this is a team that I said good for the first how many weekends, but I agree. I think Tennessee is one of the best teams in the country right now. But to get swept and to get run ruled on Friday and to give up 8 home runs as a pitching staff in 3 days, that raises a lot of red flags for me, no matter who you're up against. Now, I think Coach Anderson is somebody who is the perfect coach who understands how to handle that adversity. But this team needs to respond quickly and mentally figure out what's going on, because it's one thing if you're a pitcher, you're always taught if the ball lands in front of the outfield, that's like, I don't want to say it's not on you, but in a lot of ways, it's not. We can change, the defense to make it work. Now, when it's getting beat over the head without a chance for any single one of your teammates to be able to make an out, that's when the problems are there. And I think right now as a staff, they need to go back to their identity and how to keep the ball in the yard, truthfully.
Is it bad that I wrote this question and my response is ask me in a week? I want to see how Missouri does this weekend against LSU. You've got 2 teams that are going to be angry,
yes,
who are going to come in trying to make a point, and it's in Columbia, which is a sometimes cold and certainly difficult place to play. I just need to see a little bit more in the lineup behind Laird and Honnold. That was the issue last year, is those 2 were so good, and then behind it was hard to find much on a consistent basis.
Mm-hmm.
I think Lauren Krings is always going to be solid. I've liked what I've seen from Sierra Harrison, but right now the vibes are, I'm waiting. I'm holding. Yeah. I'm holding on presenting good or bad vibes. I need to see what the response is this weekend. So I've got Baylor on this list, but we already talked about the Bears. So let's go to Arizona, a team out of the Pac-12 that was off to a rip-roaring start, came to Tuscaloosa. I called a couple losses that they took against Alabama, and then they lost to Louisville, and then they lost a game, won the series against Oregon State, and then this past weekend they lost the series to Washington, won game 3, but the 2 losses were smackdowns. Where are the vibes on the Arizona Wildcats?
Oh gosh, this was such a hard one for me because between last year and this season, there's so much improvement in my eyes. This is reminding me of the 2022 Arizona team that we saw really come alive. But in their last 11 games, they've won 4. They've lost 6, and they tied, which, can we talk about the tie? I mean, seriously? Like, what?
It's 2024, people. Come on.
We don't tie. I always say it's like kissing your brother. It's weird. It's awkward. We don't do it. Like, how do you score it? So I would say my vibes are questionable. And that's tough for me to say because I have felt really good things, but they need to get back to their winning ways before I can say a confident good.
I would say vibes are good relative to the expectations I had coming into the year, especially considering some of the injuries that have gone down pitching wise. But I'm not necessarily sure that that will be reflected in, say, hosting a regional this
Yes.
year. I'm fairly confident. I would almost lock it up that Arizona will be back in the NCAA tournament. But I don't know. Again, it's a tough team to evaluate, and they're kind of in the same boat as the next team on the list, which is the Oregon Ducks. I left them for dead. Sorry, my bad. They opened up outside the top 80 in the first RPI, but they've shot up to 37 as of yesterday. I haven't looked at where they are today. They put up 20 in game one against Utah. The Ducks seem to finally be putting some of the pieces together and looking like the team we thought they might be in the preseason.
I have them as a very good vibes because I agree. The expectation of this team coming into the season, they have blown people away, and it's really their offensive power. When you think about Oregon, especially with the new head coach who came from obviously Oklahoma, has that pitching background, within Coach Lombardi, but they put up 32 runs last weekend, and I think we're just seeing so much explosiveness offensively from them that I think their vibes are good right now. I think they're peaking at the right time heading into conference play. And I think Pac 12 is one that they can make a run for in the last year of the conference.
I completely agree. And we'll see what they can do. I'm going to skip a couple. We're going to do one more, which is Louisville. Louisville has some good wins.
Yes.
They have some interesting losses. They lost last night to Miami of Ohio. It's been kind of a tough team to evaluate. They're sitting at 19-10. I'll mention some of the good wins as I pull up the resume, and my computer takes forever. So they beat Arizona. They've beaten FAU, who's improved this year. They got swept by Virginia Tech. One of those games went to extras. They lost to Miami of Ohio. They lost a couple of South Florida. So Louisville, it seems like one of those fringe teams, right? One of those teams that will probably be on the bubble once we get to Selection Sunday.
I know this wasn't an option, but I wrote okay vibes.
Sure vibes.
Because that's kind of how I feel is, you said it perfectly. They have some impressive resume wins, but then they'll turn around and they'll drop a game that I'll be like, man, like I didn't think they would. So again, it kind of goes back to, I think they have had wins that should give this team confidence that they can play against anybody. I think they have a really interesting mix of, they have speedy players. You have the younger Mac who is making headwaves on the base pass, and you have some, talented defenders, but you just need to string it together consistently. And I think that's what I'm waiting to see from this team.
I muted myself. My bad. The chat's still popping. We'll get to those in just a little bit. All right, let's go to now our game for the week. I wish I had a snappy video, but I don't. It's the regional host draft. So here's how this is going to work. We will each pick 5 teams, one after the other, that we feel confident right now that we're ready to lock up to host a regional. So now, we'll see who goes first. I'll flip a coin or something.
Yeah, because I'm feeling competitive in this. So
well, of course I'm going to win, but we'll see how this goes. So once one of our teams are picked, that's off the board, and we have to branch out a little bit. So Sydney Supple, screen or cover? I'm flipping the phone.
Are you flipping your phone? I hope you have a protective case.
We'll see.
Okay, screen.
It is screen.
Yeah.
So you get first pick. Who's your first lock to host a regional right now?
Okay, well, this is the easiest one. Oklahoma. Let's just start with the top.
Okay.
And then it gets interesting.
So, all right, one down. I will go ahead and lock up Georgia. And I will take Georgia because I think that they are going to win the SEC. And if you win the SEC, even though conference standings do not factor in whatsoever into the seeding, if you win the SEC, you're going to be a top 8. Yeah. So I think Georgia is my first team off the board.
Okay. Mine is Duke. And I say that very confidently because I believe they have the resume to back it up. And, I was even impressed with their performance against Florida State. Granted, they lost one game. I thought the response was well. I think they have very talented seniors and the most dangerous sophomore class in the country that's only going to get better between hitting and pitching.
I did not mean to laugh. Pick 8, you cowards, from Callan Dean. No, because I like to have a little insurance, and also we've already been on for 45 minutes. So my second pick, Duke is interesting. I'm going to take Stanford because they're sitting at number 1 in the RPI right now, and I feel fairly confident that they will not drop outside the top 12 or so based on that positioning. Nyjah Kennedy, obviously very good. And, it was impressive to me this weekend against Cal that the other pitchers seemed to step up. Nyjah did not win all 3 of those games against the Bears. And that's kind of been one of the other questions alongside what the offense is going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and lock up Stanford. So you've got Oklahoma and Duke. I've got Georgia, Stanford. What's next?
Man, you put me in a really tough situation. Because I want to say one, but I also want to give my other one that I feel like is going to step up to the plate.
Well, you've got 3 spots left, so do what you want.
Wait, how are we doing? We're doing 5, right?
5 each.
Oh my gosh. It just got so much more exciting for me.
I know.
Okay. All right. Then I'm going with my one that I think is more not controversial, but Tennessee.
Yeah.
We talked about already Kiki Malloy and the rest of the team. Everything is peaking for them at the right time.
I like that pick.
I'm so excited. I have 5 picks. I thought we combined, and I was like, I don't want to share my picks.
Oh no, it's 5 each. This is always where it gets kind of interesting. I'm gonna go ahead and put Texas. Okay. I think they'll be a host. Mm-hmm. And I think that top 8, I feel actually quite confident that Texas will be top 8. Their RPI currently, yes, Kevin. I got you, Kevin. Why has Texas not come off the board? I got you, buddy. I just picked him. We're in. I like Texas. I think they're one of the best teams in America, and I think that they will be able to rack up the wins that will be necessary for them to host a regional and probably host a super.
I think that's a safe bet. I almost feel like we're making a charcuterie board, and like you're putting it in Texas, I would say, is like the meat, the protein. They're going to do well.
Yeah, Texas is like the brie that everybody attacks the second that board comes down. So congratulations to the Fighting Texas Brie cheeses.
All right, I'm taking LSU.
Okay.
I think they're going to figure things out internally within Ole Miss, but they don't get this far without obviously being very talented. I think they have one of the talented pitching staffs as a whole. And you have somebody, like Taylor at shortstop and at the plate, you can win a lot of ball games. And I think they are. I believe they are.
I'm trying to decide if I want to get a little squirrely.
I think you do. I think now's the time.
Because you kind of, in a way, kind of took an out there pick with Duke. Not that I think, Duke's outside the top 16 right now in the RPI, and their strength of schedule is not super duper strong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm gonna lock up. I'm gonna do it. Texas A&M.
I like it.
I'm gonna lock up Texas A&M. I think they're gonna host a regional this year. I think it's time. Davis Diamond is too nice to be just sitting there empty in the NCAA tournament. Emily Kennedy has been a story this year. The offense is well-rounded. I love what Trisha Ford has done with this pitching staff. And, you want to see a little bit more from some of the other arms, but Kennedy's been good enough to where it hasn't really impacted you yet. And yeah, I'm gonna lock up A&M. I think they host a regional this year.
I like that pick.
All right, one spot left for each of us. This is it.
I hope people in the chat are excited. Mine, who I think is going to be the Pac-12 champions this year, I'm going to come on record saying it, Washington. I talked to Ruby May Lynn all the way in the fall, and she just kept talking about this underdog mentality that they had. And she was like, we all have like a little dog in us. And I think you've seen it shine through, and they're no longer an underdog in my eyes. I think they're one of the top teams in the country. I still go back to opening weekend, watching them compete against Oklahoma. I was like, this team is capable of greatness.
We just got a tweet from Scarbrowski, Amanda Scarborough, with the eyes, because I mentioned the Ags.
I love it. She had to be pumped for that one.
Oh, for sure. All right, so I've got one spot left. A couple teams we have not mentioned. Clemson.
Yes.
We have not mentioned Missouri. We have not mentioned Oklahoma State.
Those, yeah.
I'm going to say that I don't love that either. I'm trying to think about strength of schedule, right? So strength of schedule is often a metric that is cited, and some of the teams who are fringe teams that have really high strength of schedule metrics will typically get the benefit of the doubt.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm looking at teams like Baylor, like Auburn potentially. I think UCLA has a shot. I think that we could sneakily see Texas State.
Yeah.
5 overall strength of schedule right now. If that can be sustained, I wouldn't be shocked if the Bobcats are in the mix to host. But I think my final team will have to be Oklahoma State.
Yes.
Because, of course, they're too talented. Lexi Kilfoyle is pitching too well. The Tulsa game aside, I think that the offense is potent enough to where I don't think they're going to win the Big 12, but I think that it would be a pretty big shock if Oklahoma State wasn't in the top 16.
I agree. And I think you bring up, Clemson and other teams that I do think have a shot, and I don't want to say it's locked down, but as long as they perform in conference, I agree. A team like Oklahoma State is going to host. I think both of us, we picked a few teams that I believe could do it, but a lot of people would see them as bubble teams.
Yeah, fringe teams for sure. All right, so that's the regional host draft. Thank you, everybody, for watching that. We've got a little bit of time left. We'll spend just fairly quickly, like 45 seconds, on a couple questions that I've seen. CJ Bunker, with OU's unanimous number 1, who do you guys feel is the second best team in the country now from what you've seen so far in the season, and third best if 2 and 3 are close? Sydney, who is your right now clear number 2?
Right now, I'm still saying LSU. I think their resume shows it. I think anyone can have an uncharacteristic weekend. I believe they had that against Ole Miss. I believe they're going to rise from it. It was their first real test of adversity. And anytime you lose your first game of the season, when I think they finally felt the pressure of, if we secure this weekend, we're going to be on top. I believe they felt it. I think they're going to come back from it, but that's my 2. As for 3, that's hard because in my mind, there's a lot of teams who I think are kind of tied for me at 3.
I think Georgia and Texas.
Yeah.
I'm sticking with what
You're high on that Georgia wave. I feel it.
That offense, just they do everything right, and they give themselves a chance every time out. And if you're not on your game 100%, if you make a mistake, they will cash in. And we've seen that all year. I think some of it is a little bit of consistency as well with the Dogs. I want to see them do what they did to Alabama against some of the other teams on the schedule. Sometimes they're not 100% sharp, which it's hard to be 100% sharp every game in and game out. But I think Georgia has an incredibly high ceiling. Mm-hmm. So I think that Georgia would be my answer there. Of course, everybody, make sure that you're liking and subscribing to the channel on YouTube, like this video. Thank you to the comments. We've got another one from Chad. What exactly jumps out about Alabama's record, body of work, early conference results, and remaining schedule that warrants them being top 15 in every poll? So I obviously come at this from an interesting perspective. Sid, you had Alabama, I believe, 15 or 16 in your ballot. So walk us through what went into that decision.
I was just going to tell you the floor is all yours, because I don't think anyone knows the DNA of this team like you do. For me, truthfully, Alabama, flat out honesty, obviously I played down there last season in Super Regional, thought just a lineup top to bottom, and you have Montana Fouts, one of the top teams in the country. I didn't know what to expect of them this season, and I have been pleasantly surprised with the players that have stepped up. One in the circle, but two around. I think you're seeing Bailey Dowling stepped up. You obviously have Jenna Johnson, who has been there, but is now taken on, it almost seems like, this leadership role. And you're seeing new faces that I think are going to kind of bring Alabama back to that level that they had been at for how many years. And I guess I would love your take on this. I felt like in the beginning of the season, they obviously had how many wins in a row, but there wasn't that level of competition in the beginning like other teams had. And now they're going to face that week in out with an SEC. And I'm really excited to see them against that top tier caliber teams.
I think that that's a fair reading. I will point out, though, I kind of think in name only does it seem like the non-conference wasn't. Now, was it what it was last year when Alabama went to Clearwater and all that? No, of course not. Clearwater will boost that non-con strength of schedule more than any other potential tournament that you might host or go to in a neutral site. But Georgia Tech has proven that offense is pretty darn good, and they did not score very much at all against Alabama in week one. I think Virginia is a tournament team. They're top 50 in the RPI. Nobody really thinks about Virginia, but Coach Harden's done a really good job. Eden Bigham is a pitcher that can really move up and down the zone with her rise ball. Like, she can throw on multiple planes, and that's an offense that's pretty scrappy. They just find ways. I think that with Alabama, one of the things that helps them is there's really no shame in losing a series at Georgia and winning against a top 5 team on the road. You're going to get some kudos for that, even though you lost a series, but also there really isn't the super baffling loss. A lot of people have this year taken an L where you're like, that's strange. And right now, Alabama's worst loss is to Olivia Lackey in South Alabama, and she's taken out a couple SEC teams. So I think that one of the things that's important when selecting a top 25 is what is it that bumps a team up and down? And typically when I've moved teams down significantly, it's for those baffling losses, especially if they've got an ace in the circle. Like, for example, LSU, I've already started plotting a little bit what my poll is going to be like. With Berzon taking the L and with Kelly Lynch getting lit up by Ole Miss, there's going to be a drop next week unless they can turn it around this weekend against Missouri. So I think that Alabama is not doing enough wrong to warrant being outside the top 15, and they've done just enough right to kind of stay in that 10 to 15 part of the conversation.
I think that's a very fair evaluation.
Yeah, the thing about polls is it's oftentimes not all about you. You have to look and see what everybody else is doing. Texas State lost a game this weekend to James Madison, and I had to bump them up 2 spots in my ballot because losing to James Madison isn't as awful as some of the other things that we saw go down this weekend. So there we go.
And I'll just say that being a player perspective, the rankings don't matter, truthfully. You know that the only ranking that really matters at the end of the year is your RPI and the games you were able to collect, with higher teams' RPIs, and hopefully the losses you were able to escape that would have killed your RPI. That's really what comes down to it. And, the RPIs are really fun for, different, organizations to be able to do. But I feel like from a player's perspective, that's in your mind, that's just noise. And you have to just buy into winning a conference championship and getting as many ranked wins as you can.
Yeah. Look, I'll sit in the committee room. Bring me in. I'm down. But my ballot, our ballots for the Supple America Top 25 are not on those team sheets, and none of the polls are. It's about the metrics and about what you do on the field that will determine those things. Thank you for the questions. And now, real quick, let's talk about what's coming up before we wrap up this show. Wednesday, midweek mayhem. We got 4 big games. There are a lot of games, but
huge.
Let's go. You got an ACC Network double header. South Carolina at Clemson, Texas at Florida State. Fire me up. I will be on the air, but who cares? I will have the stat broadcast up tracking these 2 games. It's going to be an epic night of softball on the ACC Network.
You're going to be on the air. I'm going to be literally in the couch right behind this computer watching because I am fired up for these matchups, especially right now. I'm in Syracuse, New York, so I've been able to spend a lot of time with the Syracuse's team, and I think everyone throughout the conference has eyes on this matchups tonight.
Yeah, and Clemson, South Carolina's trying to make a statement. The pitching has been really good, but the offense is now last in the SEC in batting average. Clemson has looked shakier than I expected they would this year. And Florida State, hello. Now is the time. Now is the time to make a statement. All right. You've got the opportunity. Texas has been as shaky as they've been all year in the last week and a half or so. Now's the time, if you're Florida State, to say, you know what? All that craziness the first month of the year, put it aside. We're back. And I think they have the capability. McKenna Reed's starting to pitch the best she has all season. But at the same time, I just mentioned Texas as being one of the top 3 teams in the country. So I don't know how that game will go.
I agree with you. Although I will say on Clemson, I think they have a ton of momentum. It almost felt like this loss to Minnesota sparked something in them. And then they went on, they're on an 8-game win streak right now. So I think they're clicking at the right time. We talked about Kansas. I'm fired up to see them play Missouri because I still believe Missouri is one of the best teams in the country. And Kansas has been proving themselves. And this is another opportunity to come in and prove themselves. I'm high on Texas State. I love watching Jessica Mullen. I mean, she is absolutely nasty. She has 96 strikeouts in, 97 innings, a sub-1 ERA. So with her on the mound, they have a chance to beat anyone in the country. And then, like you said, perfectly, FSU, this is your opportunity. I was able to be with that team this past weekend, 2 past weekends ago in Florida Gulf Coast. And it was interesting talking to the players on the team, and they kind of made it seem like, we know what everyone's saying about us, but we know who we are. And I think them saying that to me gave me some reassurance that this team feels super tight knit. They feel very confident in where they can go to. I think they are well aware that they have not hit their peak or their destination. But that's the great thing about these opportunities is they still have how many more weekends for them.
Hey, in the words of my podcast partner, Tom Canterbury, teams are allowed to get better. And
Exactly.
Florida State, it feels like, is a prime candidate to be one of those teams that gets better. And I'm glad you mentioned A&M at Texas State. That'll be on ESPN Plus at 7 p.m. Eastern time. How will A&M pitch that game? Because they've got Auburn coming to town. You're getting Penta twice. Will Kennedy have to throw 3 games this week? I don't know. We'll see.
Agree. I very much believe they're going to go by committee for that reason. As you said, I think, show different looks against this Texas State offense so they can never get comfortable anytime you're bringing a new pitcher, but then also so, there isn't a pitcher with too many arm circles heading into the weekend.
All right, conference play. Let's pick a series. I've got a bunch listed here. Pick one, Sydney Supple, one that you want to keep an eye on start to finish.
Man, this is a tough one. I'll pick Big Ten because I'm covering them heavily was that a boring choice? Should I pick somebody else?
No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Do it.
I believe that this weekend has going to be the difference maker for all the way in the last weekend. I think you're seeing Penn State, Indiana, who are going to run the tables with Big Ten. Granted, I still think there are a handful of other teams, Northwestern, Minnesota, Michigan, who have the same amount of capability of winning the title. But I think this weekend, in terms of both of these teams are going to get a lot of wins throughout the conference. So who can ever kind of walk away, I'm going to say as heavyweight champions, carries an early belt towards that finish line.
I'm going to go a little off the cuff here.
Oh.
I'm going to throw out Kentucky at Florida.
Okay.
Yeah, so the Kentucky Wildcats, it's not gone well lately. They blew that game against Ohio State. They got swept a couple weekends ago by LSU. But Kentucky has been an enigma in the Southeastern Conference for many, many years. And in true enigma fashion, it would make sense for them to go to Gainesville and win that series. I'm not picking Kentucky to do it. But if Kentucky is an enigma, it would be this weekend where Stephanie Schoonover and Vickers and that offense get everything clicking and they beat a Florida team that is very, very good, but has sometimes had some lapses. And shout out to Amanda Scarborough, who'll be on the call this weekend on the ESPN family of networks, Florida and Kentucky. Now, if Kentucky is not an enigma, then that means Florida is probably going to win this series and do so handily and might sweep. So I think that this is just a good test for Kentucky to kind of see where they are truly, and frankly, to see if they're in the cellar of the SEC, because what Ole Miss did to LSU kind of clears up that bottom spot, and somebody's got to go there. Somebody has to be the weakest team, and I'm a little concerned it might be Kentucky. This weekend, though, is the opportunity to maybe switch up some perception. And real quick, I wanted to make mention of what I had earlier discussed. The top 3 perceived teams in the SEC this weekend, all on the road. LSU at Missouri, Georgia at Ole Miss, and Tennessee at South Carolina. So, again, I think that those 3 teams have kind of a little bit separated themselves in the national rankings, if not yet standings, but things could get a little wonky with all those road trips coming up. We'll see if there's some mayhem or if it's a fairly standard weekend.
Oh, I'm calling for the mayhem. I agree with you. This is Kentucky's opportunity. We're going to tune in and listen to Amanda. And like I said, March Madness, it's softball. It is for softball. I am going to die on that note with the parity right now throughout all of the conferences.
Yeah, I mean, I trust Virginia softball to score more than I do Virginia men's basketball. And I'll just leave it at that. All right, Sydney, give us a little tease. What's coming up on Sydney's Spin this week?
Oh, man, we have an exciting episode that I'm very, very thrilled to share with all of you. 2-time Big Ten Pitcher of the Week already this season, Ashley Miller for Northwestern, graduate transfer from Michigan State, which great. The storylines don't script themselves. Northwestern faces Michigan State in the opening weekend in the Big Ten. Tune in, get her take on that and her whole transition to Evanston. It was great chatting with her, and I'm really excited for everyone to be able to listen in.
Oh, you schedule makers, you see what you're doing. I mean, all right, so Sydney Spin. Tonight, Softball Speakeasy.
Yes.
It's the Claire Davidson episode with Rain Wilson and Kelly Torres. So it's going to be a lot of Duke talk after that series win at Florida State. Check that out. Tom and I had a Just Means More softball with the great Kiki Malloy from Tennessee. Nicole Mendez has already done 10 Teams 2 Rings. Check that out on YouTube and make sure that you're subscribing, liking, all that jazz, sharing to your friends. Help us increase subscribers. It'll make us all happy. There'll also be a Walton's World coming up and the final swing from Aaliyah Jordan on Friday. Content on content on content. And we love to see it because you're supposed to be busy this time of year when it's softball season.
And you can be busy listening to you. I'm on call for Northwestern Michigan State this weekend, being able to tell the storyline there. And I have to shout out Walton's World because he is killing it with the guests. And I have loved listening to that every single week. That has been a really fun. If you're just any fan of the game, you're able to hear from so many different former players, people who are in the booth every single weekend with the top teams in the country, but then to also get a current head coach perspective, you can't beat it. All of the podcasts bring such a fun, different energy.
Yeah, shout out to my pal, Tim Walton. I mean, when I was doing the first game of the Alabama-Florida series, I went down to the field. We probably sat and talked about the pod for 15 minutes.
Oh, I love it.
What a guy. He's crushing it. Walton's World will have a new episode coming out with Tara and Coach Walton from the University of Florida. And yeah, if you want to check out Sydney this weekend on Northwestern Michigan State, me and Tal on Alabama, Virginia Tech. Tal and I are working tonight, so if you need a phone broadcast or you're watching the ACC network, check out Alabama UAB. We got a fun little Ashley Prangy pack that we'll be showing in that broadcast as she returns to Tuscaloosa. Sydney, this has been a ton of fun. I've really enjoyed Good Morning Softball America with you here today. Anything you want to say before we shut her down?
Oh, thank you. It has been a pleasure. And for everyone who watched and tuned in your questions, we absolutely love them. I love working with Supple America, being able to work alongside you, Tara, who I'm filling in for. It's just fun to be a part of this team, and it's such an exciting year. I think one of the most exciting years of softball, and we're not even halfway through. That's the best part.
And also, I've got your regional picks written down, so we'll be seeing who was correct a little bit later on. Thank you to everybody for tuning in. Thank you, like Sydney said, for contributing to the chat, for asking quality questions, and for engaging with us here on this episode of Good Morning Softball America. Again, make sure that you subscribe, like not just the YouTube page. Don't just follow on Twitter, but also check out all the pods, whether it be the video or the audio versions. There are so many possibilities to consume your softball content, and we're happy that some of you chose to join us here this morning. For Sydney Supple, I'm Gray Robertson. This has been Good Morning Softball America. We'll catch you next time.